Good evening, Peacemakers. Glad to be back with you. And I told Michael that the class did not record last session, so he can't be held responsible for anything he said. But I have no doubt that it was great, and I have no doubt that the disappointment you have in seeing me back is palpable. We are finishing lesson number 7. Between the two of you, and continuing this idea of the importance of face-to-face, mano-a-mano, personal communication when we're dealing with conflict, and the importance of directly dealing with problems. There's lots of different tactics that we might take to try to avoid confrontation at all, or to try to avoid direct confrontation, to try to skirt around some of these things. But if our goal and our attitude is about honoring God and really about restoration, we're not going to be able to do that from a distance. And so as we start our class, I want us to look at a few passages here and just think about these words of restoration that we find in these things. If somebody would turn to, Michael, if you would turn to 1 Thessalonians, and Trevor, if you would turn to Galatians, and Jeff, if you would get James. And let's look at these passages and just kind of get our mind set on this idea of restoration. First, we'll look at 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 14.
We urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all.
Okay. Does anybody else have any translations they're using that translate any of those words differently? Like admonish and encourage and help.
Warn.
Pardon? Warn. Yeah. So go ahead.
Exhort also.
Exhort. Yeah. Those are all words of, I would call them words of restoration. They're words of trying to bring someone or keep someone in a right relationship with God, trying to get them out of sinful attitudes or actions that they may be dealing with. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1, which I know you talked about this, we've read this many times, but let's go ahead and read it.
Brothers and sisters, even if a person is caught in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual are to restore such a person in the spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself, as that you are not tempted with them.
Right. So again, I can't think of a passage that more directly commands us. If you are someone who is spiritual, if you are someone who is strong spiritually, and that may be day to day, but be the one who goes and restores that person who is struggling. Be the one who sees that person in sin, that person struggling with weakness, and use that spiritual strength, because it's worthless to have that spiritual strength if it's not doing any good. What good is it to go to the gym all the time, get really strong, and never pick anything up, never use that strength for any good? James chapter 5 and verse 20.
Let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save the soul from death and cover a multitude of sins.
Okay. So, what are we trying to accomplish when we deal with things like this? What are we trying to accomplish in this restoration? We're trying to bring someone back. We're trying to save them from sin. We're trying to, some translations say, cover their sin. We're trying to save a soul from eternal damnation. And, you know, it's easy for us to look at our issues with other people as, well, these are just their petty little squabbles. But they have real implications. You know, if we don't care enough to try to restore people, if we don't care enough to try to save them from sin, then why should we expect God to care enough to try to save us? What do you see in all these words? What do you see in all these different descriptions of this idea of restoration? I think we see love, don't we? I certainly think we have to see love in all that. We have to see that there is a relationship there, and that there is an attitude of putting God and His glory first. But I think we also have to understand that this is a process, right? This is not a moment. You know, admonishment, encouragement, these are ongoing things that all of us need to receive at times, as well as needing to give them. And we have to understand that sometimes there's going to be some gentle nudging needed, right? Does everybody need to be browbeaten and smacked upside the head with the thickest Bible you have when they make a mistake? No.
That's kind of the thing I took from 1 Thessalonians 5:14 is patience. Kind of in a world where there's not a lot of patience for those kind of things especially. You might need to go in there and be patient with those people. Understand, like you said, it might be a process. It might take some time. It might take a lot of working and take some time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there going to be times when there's going to need to be some more stern correction? Yeah. Yeah, there's going to be times when, you know, somebody is going to really need to receive that tough love, we might call it. They're going to need to hear some things they don't want to hear. But at the same time, those things have to come from a place of love and from a hope of restoration. You know, anytime we approach correcting someone, exhorting someone, you know, talking to them about sin in their lives, if it comes from a place of, you know, let me tell you what you did wrong and why I would never do that, we're not going to get very far with that. But when we come to them with a spirit of love and with a spirit of gentleness, as we're commanded, and with a spirit of wanting to restore that soul to God, then there's hope. And it's certainly something that we're commanded to do.
I think that's one of the good things to put in Galatians 6, verse 20 here, is the ultimate goal is to concern for the souls of others, and concern for the souls of everyone's soul. That's the primary objective. And secondly, you see in that sin is not something that necessarily needs to be broadcast.
Absolutely.
The more you can hide sin, the less effect it's going to have on everyone else.
Right. And as we've talked about, you know, is the first thing I should do when I see someone sinning is go tell everybody else in the church what's going on? No. Because they may not know about it yet, and if they don't, they probably don't need to know about it yet. What do all these passages we've looked at tell us to go and do? Talk to that person. You know, we think about that idea of throwing a rock in a pond and the ripple effect and all that. Well, if we can stop that ripple from even happening, and make that thing just slide in the water and never make a splash like an Olympic diver, then that's a good thing. That's a great thing. But we need to have that discernment, absolutely, to go to that person and not seeking to embarrass them, not seeking to expose them to everyone just for the sake of stirring something up, but trying to stir up love and good works as we're commanded.
Even if it is something that should be brought before the church, I feel like it should be that person's confession and not our,
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, I mean we have to talk to that person first. I mean, they don't need to be just blindsided by everybody coming to them knowing what's going on. We certainly need to try to start with restoration there, and if that doesn't work, then we may need to go through the process as we've outlined in other lessons, but in talking to the church, the elders, or whatever the case may be. So, thinking about this idea of just between the two of us, how we approach people makes a big difference. And, sometimes we have a hard time with that because sometimes we want to be overly direct, particularly with people that maybe we don't have as strong a relationship with. I'm going to talk to somebody who I've never met before differently than I'm going to talk to my family, my spouse, pretty much everybody in this room that I've known for so long and have affection for. But I think it's interesting to look at Paul's tactic here in Acts chapter 17. So Paul here is in Athens, and he's gone to the Areopagus, however you want to say it. And he sees all this paganism. And so he's here in Athens, and there's just paganism everywhere. And this was something that certainly the early church dealt with pretty much all over. How did Paul approach that? It would have been easy for Paul to have just said, look at all these stupid statues out here that you people act like are something. How dumb can you guys be? I mean, those are just rocks that you chiseled into whatever fairy tales that you made up, and this whole thing is just ridiculous. Would that be a good tactic? Was that what Paul did? I don't think it is. What did Paul do? Somebody read Acts chapter 17, verses 22 and 20. Let's go to read verses 22 to 27.
And Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus, or Moorfield, and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. As I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. God who made the world and everything in it, and he is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. For he worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined the pre-appointed times and the boundaries of his dwelling. That's where you say.
27, yeah.
So that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grow for him and find him, for he is not far from each one of us.
So Paul sees their paganism, and he sees how devoted they are to these things. And how does he use that?
He commends them for being spiritual, and then he focuses on something that they have in common versus condemning them for their paganism and focusing on all of the differences.
Absolutely. He made a connection with them. And in doing so, it allowed him to speak to them in things that they understood. And very much in the way that Jesus spoke in parables and talked about spiritual things through earthly things, Paul spoke to them about spiritual things through that kind of connected to pagan things. They were religious, though maybe not as particularly spiritual, but they understood some of the things that were important to understand about religion. And they had a devotion. And Paul understood very well the idea of being devoted to something and then finding out, oh, well, this isn't the way I should be going at this, and changing when he learned about Christ. And so for him, I think this was maybe particularly something he understood and was able to do better than others. But he observed the objects of their worship, and he saw that they had this inscription on one of them, to an unknown God. And he saw in that there was this seeking for something else. And maybe hoping that seeking for something else was maybe an understanding that, we worship these gods and they're great and all, but we kind of feel like there's probably something more than these stones. There's probably something higher than this. We don't know what it is. We don't know what to call it. But, there's that yearning, and I think we see that in all of us. We use that phrase. We all have this God-shaped hole that only He can fill, and I think they were trying to fill it with these pagan idols, but it wasn't getting the job done. And so they kind of had a spot reserved in case they figured out what this missing thing was. And so Paul began to proclaim that to them, to try to help them understand who the one true God was. And so when we talk to people, whether we're talking to them who people who don't know God, or we're talking to people who know God, who have been faithful and have fallen away, we can't just talk at them. We've got to find some kind of connection. We've got to find some common ground, and something to encourage them. And I think that's exactly what Paul did here. And so what were the results of Paul's message here? He's speaking to this group of people who didn't know him from the dirt path he came on. And what was the response? Yeah. In verse 32, now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, we will hear you again about this. And so Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius, the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So Paul was able to make those connections. And some people scoffed, but others were interested, and others were convinced. And so he had success in doing that. Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 10.
I didn't mention it, but real quick in that.
Okay.
In verse 28, it's talking about finding common ground. Pretty sure that he's quoting secular work
Yeah.
that they would have been familiar with. I'm not sure we got many instances of him doing that, but he does that there, try to create some common ground. In addition to the things you've already said.
Yeah.
And then turns right around in the next verse and says, we shouldn't think that these idols were anything. But he gets to the point.
Yeah.
But he gets there in a way that we'll report.
Absolutely. And again, doing exactly what Jesus did in teaching parables. He took something that he knew they understood, and he drew analogies, drew connections to things that they were seeking to understand, whether they knew it or not. Absolutely. Hebrews chapter 10. And somebody read verses 24 and 25 for us.
And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing.
We read this passage a lot. And why do we read this passage a lot, and what do we usually teach from it? Yeah. Better show up to church. That sometimes that's the only thing we draw out of it, and I think that's there's certainly that aspect of it. But when we look at everything that's being taught here, let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, encouraging one another, and then all the more as you see the day drawing near. There's a lot to that. I mean, that is more than just showing up at church on Sunday and Wednesday. And I think when we consider this idea of seeking to restore and having these personal conversations with people and demonstrating love and trying to bring them back to Christ and trying to encourage them away from sin, trying to teach them the truth, that's exactly what this is about. Stirring up one another to love and good works is not just inviting people over for dinner. It's not just saying nice things to them and complimenting their kids. It's doing the real hard stuff. It's teaching and admonishing and encouraging. And when you see someone who is in weakness and using your spiritual strength to encourage them, that is absolutely love and good works. And that is the kind of love that is going to generate the hope as we see the day drawing near, and encouraging people to think about spiritual things in everything they do, and not just on Sunday and Wednesday, or not just at different times, not siloing God into this one part of their life, helping people to be encouraged, not neglecting to meet together. If we only see brothers and sisters for a couple hours on Sunday and an hour or so on Wednesday, I don't know that we're really fulfilling that idea of not neglecting to assemble, because I think our relationship as Christians needs to be more than that. There are lots of opportunities for us to be together. And, just the other week, we had a lot of different things going on, and it seemed like this crazy busy few days. And then at the end of it all, I was like, man, that was a lot of fun. That was so encouraging, because we had people in our homes. We were at other people's homes, and there was just so much that happened. And realizing the joy that came from that really, made me realize how much we neglect to do that. And we get busy, and there's certainly a lot going on in our lives. But if we're neglecting one another in our spiritual family, then we need to really consider the ramifications of that and the opportunities that we're missing to love people in this way and to encourage them. So that's something that, when we read this passage, we need to think about the total relationship that we have with each other. Any thoughts about that?
Down in verse 36, it says, "For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised." And it's hard to have that endurance by yourself.
Yep.
But when you have each other and you have that relationship, it's easier to keep going. You think about somebody running a marathon, using their family and friends, go to different points and give them water and cheer them on and pictures, and you think about that versus you know, if you're gonna run around the corner and see Natalie and your boys, you're gonna keep running, but if they're not there and nobody's there for you and nobody cares, you're like, what am I running for?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The Bible uses that running analogy a lot. I have a friend who runs marathons, and he's been all over the world running marathons. If I was going to do that much traveling, I think I would just rather enjoy it. But he has a group of friends, and they all run together, and they encourage one another, and they train together, and they do all that. And that's the reason he's been able to have the success he's had in doing all that. It would be very hard to do that much training and that much endurance running on your own. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that get involved, and that's why it's such a great analogy for the church. Absolutely. So again, thinking about this idea of face-to-face communication, we live in a text-driven world.
You young people do.
Well, and unfortunately, we're dragging everybody kicking and screaming with us, I think. But you know, I say text driven, and we immediately think of our phones. But how many emails do you get a day? You know, you take a week's vacation, you come back. What's the number on your inbox? You know, I work at a bank. I don't have access to email outside of there because it's not. They just don't want to spend the money on me having it, I guess, which I'm totally fine with. It's the greatest thing ever. And when I come back, there's this huge number of emails, and I'm like, well, they're probably not that important because the world still revolved while I was gone. So, you know, you kind of skim through them. And I have a friend who always says when he gets back from vacation, he just deletes his whole inbox and says if they want it, they'll call back. But we live in a world full of this kind of communication. What gets stripped out of that? Yeah, exactly. You know, if Natalie and I are texting each other about something, there's a good chance that it's not being communicated the way that one or the other one of us intends to, because in that bare text, there's no way to convey the tone of your voice, the way you said something. And so what do we have to do? We have to guess. And I usually guess wrong. And that's why it's so important to have face-to-face communication when we talk to people, so that they can see our facial expressions, our body language, our care and concern for them, because that's not going to come out as well. Now, some of you may be really good writers, and you may be really good with language, and you may do better, but some of us are not. And so we may struggle with that. And so if you send somebody a text that says, hey, you need to quit sinning, well, there's a lot of subtext that's going to be left out of that, and may not come through the way we want it to come through. And we see there's in the book here, there's lots of examples that are used. I thought Abigail's intervention in 1 Samuel 25 was kind of an interesting one. We looked at this recently in another class, in the David class. But it's kind of a fascinating thing that happened here. And of course, there's a lot of cultural things that are going on there. But if you look in 1 Samuel chapter 25, and you know, somebody can summarize the story for us there a little bit. What was going on here in this passage? Who was Abigail's husband?
A man named Nabal.
Mm-hmm.
David and his men are kind of on the run. I don't know if that's the right word. They are.
I'd say it's as close to the truth as we can understand.
Yeah.
They were traipsing.
They come to his property.
They did, and he did not receive him warmly. And basically told them he didn't know who David was, and they all needed to take a hike. Abigail was maybe a bit more interested in who David was. Maybe she knew better. Maybe she was just a nicer person. But she did not really agree with her husband's treatment of David and his men. And so it says there in verse 18, then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisin and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on the donkeys. And she went down to David and his men and she took care of their needs. And she did that because she knew that apparently knew what David and his men were capable of. And we know from the text there that she really did save her husband and their household from destruction. And so because of that, there was an intermediation that was made, an intervention, we might say, between her and her husband. It's not probably going to be that severe for us most of the time, but oftentimes when we have something between one another, there may be times that we need someone to intervene for us. We may need someone to sort of break the ice, to sort of create the conditions under which we can have this face-to-face meeting. You think about the story, the scenario we went through the other day. There was an example of that in there where someone else kind of arranged that meeting so that there was a neutral third party that everyone would feel comfortable with. And when we go back to our kind of chart there of the responses, intermediation, arbitration, those things, we may need to involve other people to get us to a point where we can talk face to face. It may be required to bring down tempers. It may be required to just get the conversation started. But whatever the case may be, we need to have the humility to allow that to happen. And we as godly people may need to be the ones who step in and say, hey, let me help. Let me make this work. Let me arrange this, and do what's right. The command there in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 24 is go. If we have something between us and a brother, God commands us to go to that person and to seek the restoration of that relationship, to seek to be forgiven or to forgive, whatever the case may be. But it's not something that can be done passively, and it's not something that can be ignored. God expects us to take care of those things. And there's just a couple other interesting passages here, just thinking about face-to-face communication. Exodus chapter 33 and verse 11 says, thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. I think that certainly says a lot about Moses' relationship with God. When we consider those who spoke to God or saw God face to face typically didn't fare very well. But it also says something about our relationships and the way that they ought to be. If God thought that much of Moses, that certainly speaks volumes. 2 John in verse 12 says, though I have much to write to you, this is the end of the letter here. It says, though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. I think this concept is not completely lost on our world today, and maybe even less so after the events of 2020 and that time frame. We all kind of, I think, made a decision to either have less interaction with people or to just really have more because we understood how much we missed it. And I think that idea of our joy being complete, we were just up with her family for Thanksgiving, and it's been a busy time the last few months, and we hadn't seen her mom and dad, hadn't seen a lot of her family in a long time, and I think there was very much a lot of joy that came from that, particularly for two little boys who were very excited. And so we need to, when we think about the relationships that we have with one another, we need to be the kind of people who facilitate the completeness of our joy together. And when that comes into restoring relationships and helping people through difficulties and sin, we need to have the courage to deal with that face to face. Any thoughts about face-to-face communication?
There's so much there in terms of, I think it's something like 90% of our communication is nonverbal, and so when you narrow it down to text, that gives you about 10% left. And so like you said, you get the text and I said, well, are they joking, or what do they mean, or what does this word mean? But when you have eye contact, then that, shows the person that you're interested in the body language and the gestures and the posture and all those things. And then there's also, we talked about a few times ago, the way that people's nervous systems regulate one another. And so, if you're texting a brother that's offended you, you might sound a lot more offended than if you're sitting on talking to him. Your posture's over here looking up like, I'm not upset. I want to address, or I am upset, or whatever it is, but I'm not being mad at you. I just want to address this and kind of clear the air. And the way that you sit, the way that your tone of voice, so your calmness, versus you can text those exact same words and they can have a much different reaction because they're missing all of the context.
I could go ahead.
Something I was thinking about it, you see over the internet, over Facebook, a lot of people like to air their thoughts. And I think it's mostly because people like to hide behind, online forums or whatever they want to post. And that face-to-face gets rid of that. It may take some courage to go to that brother face-to-face because then you are also vulnerable in yourself. You have to make sure that you are keeping yourself intact. When you're talking to someone and keeping yourself level-headed.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it is, but it's easier for me to write things down if I really want to focus on the issue. And so, but you can write it down and read it, or you can say, I want to talk to you about this. I want you to know, this is how I feel, but I've written it down for you to read and think about.
That may be a starting point.
Yeah, it's like these things are a process too. It's not, Matthew 18 says go and address them face to face, but it doesn't say that that's the one time and it's going to be solved. And so I've done that before too. Here's something I want to talk to you about. I've written this down for you to think about, and then let's, read over it. Especially if it's something that you feel is going to upset them, because then they may be really upset when they read it the first time, but then they read it again and they remember the tone when you talk, and then they really read it again and see where it's coming from. And so you can use the text. It's not like it's useless.
We talked about Zacchaeus a couple classes ago. Did Jesus leave Zacchaeus in the tree and let him just observe from afar and say, oh, hey, Zacchaeus, just listen up? What did Jesus tell Zacchaeus to do? So you get down here. Let's go to your house. Let's be together. Let's talk face to face. Jesus knew Zacchaeus' heart, that he was desiring to know and to understand, and so that wasn't going to happen with him up in a tree. They needed to be together. Jesus did a lot of that kind of teaching. Quickly, what are some barriers to communication? Romans chapter 14 and verse 13 talks a little bit about stumbling blocks, things that I think are common barriers to this kind of communication. One is prejudgment. We presume somebody's attitude and we say, well, he's never going to come around. So no point in me talking to him. No point in me dealing with it. It is what it is, and I'm just going to forget about it. Is that the kind of attitude that we're called to have? I don't think so. The second one is inflexibility. Well, I'm just going to wait until he sees my point of view. He'll come around, and he'll come to me. Is that going to work out? Probably not, because that person is thinking, well, they're never going to come around. I'm not talking to him. Indifference. Well, he's of no use to me anyway. And that, I think, is maybe the worst attitude that we can have, is just that relationship, that person, that soul, most importantly, is disposable.
There's some literature out there that talks about, conflicts in marriage, and it says when I stop fighting, then that's when I'm done. And so as long as I'm fighting, I care, and I stop fighting, and that's kind of the point. Is that, and the same thing's from friendships too. When you get to the apathy, then, like you said, when there is because not only in this context do we not care about the relationship, we care about the soul.
Absolutely. And then the last slide here, I had some verses we could look over as we have time. We have exactly 56 seconds, so we probably won't get through all of these, but we cannot adopt the laissez-faire attitude of, let everybody just do what they want to do. And the Bible commands us to act when we see souls in danger, when we see brethren who are struggling. Proverbs chapter 24, verses 11 through 12 says, "Rescue those who are being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, 'Behold, we did not know this,' does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who keeps watch over your soul know it? And will he not repay man according to his work?" God expects us to act, and he expects us to care for one another, and to try and save souls that we see in danger. Proverbs 27, in beginning of verse 5, says, "Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy." If someone who cares about us, that we care about, brings something to our attention, it may hurt, but it's much better to have that hurt than an eternal one. Thank you, guys.